Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
7-year-old Khalid al-Rashid had been mute since the night his mother died in front of him. Maya Torres was just a waitress trying to honor a dead woman's recipe when the boy whispered 4 words that would shatter 3 years of silence and change both their lives forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence was deafening. In the elegant dining room of the Crowne Plaza Hotel, one of Manhattan's most prestigious establishments, conversations flowed like champagne. Silverware clinked against fine china, and somewhere in the corner, a pianist played soft jazz. But at table 12, a different kind of quiet reigned, one that had lasted exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. 7-year-old Khalid al-Rashid sat perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on the untouched plate before him. His small hands rested in his lap, and his expression remained as unreadable as ancient stone. Across from him, his father, Tariq al-Rashid, watched his son with a mixture of hope and heartbreak that had become as familiar as breathing. Tariq was a man accustomed to solving problems. As one of the most successful Arab-American businessmen in the country, he had built an empire that spanned from oil investments to cutting-edge technology ventures. Forbes had recently listed him as one of the top 50 wealthiest individuals under 50. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals before breakfast, command the respect of world leaders, and make million-dollar decisions without flinching. But he couldn't get his own son to speak. The accident had happened on a rainy October evening 3 years ago. Tariq's wife, Layla, had been driving Khalid home from his soccer practice when a truck ran a red light. She died instantly. Khalid had been in the back seat, physically unharmed but emotionally shattered beyond repair. The last words he had spoken were, "Goodbye, Mama," as he left for practice that morning. Since that night, he hadn't uttered a single syllable. Tariq had tried everything. He'd flown in the best child psychologists from Switzerland, hired specialized speech therapists from London, consulted with trauma experts from across the globe. He'd paid for experimental treatments, alternative therapies, and countless hours of counseling. The family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been transformed into a healing sanctuary with sensory rooms, art therapy spaces, and every possible resource money could buy. Nothing worked. Khalid attended sessions silently, completed his assignments through writing and gestures, and lived his life in a bubble of profound quiet. The doctor said he wasn't physically unable to speak. There was no damage to his vocal cords, no neurological impairment. It was psychological, they explained, trauma-induced selective mutism. His grief was so deep, so overwhelming, that words simply couldn't form. Some thought he was punishing himself. Others believed he was protecting himself from further pain. The truth, perhaps, was somewhere in between. The Crowne Plaza had become their routine. Every Friday evening at 6:30, Tariq would bring Khalid here for dinner. It was one of the few places where they didn't feel the weight of pity from others. The staff was professional, discreet, and never made Khalid feel different. Most importantly, it was one of Layla's favorite restaurants. She had loved the ambiance, the food, and the way the city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Tonight marked their 60th visit. Tariq kept count, though he wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the businessman in him, always tracking metrics, always hoping that eventually the numbers would tell him something useful. Khalid had ordered the same meal every single time: grilled chicken, white rice, and steamed vegetables. He ate mechanically, methodically, but never with enjoyment. "Good evening, gentlemen." The familiar voice cut through Tariq's thoughts. Maya Torres approached their table with her characteristic warm smile, notepad in hand. She had been their server for the past 8 months, ever since the previous waitress had retired. Where others showed awkward sympathy or uncomfortable curiosity, Maya simply showed kindness. She was in her early 30s, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform was crisp, her demeanor professional, yet there was something genuine about her, something that didn't feel rehearsed or forced. She treated Khalid with the same respect she would any other guest, never infantilizing him or speaking over him to his father. "The usual?" she asked, meeting Khalid's eyes directly. She always asked him first, even though she knew he wouldn't answer. Tariq had noticed this small gesture months ago, and it had touched something in his heart. Most people directed all their questions to him, as if Khalid weren't even there. Khalid gave a small nod, his eyes flickering briefly to meet hers, before returning to his lap. It was more interaction than he gave most people. "And for you, Mr. Al-Rashid?" Maya turned to Tariq with that same warm professionalism. "The lamb, please, medium rare." He handed back the menu he hadn't really looked at. "And Maya, could you ask the chef if he might prepare the rice the way we discussed last week? The way my wife used to make it?" Something flickered across Maya's face. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Of course, I'll make sure he gets it just right." Maya Torres had never planned to become a waitress at one of Manhattan's finest establishments. Life, she had learned, rarely followed the neat trajectory you sketched out in your 20s. She was 32 now, and the dreams she'd harbored of becoming a child psychologist felt like they belonged to a different person entirely. She had been 2 semesters away from completing her doctorate at Columbia University when everything fell apart. Her younger brother, Carlos, had been diagnosed with leukemia. He was only 19, a sophomore studying engineering with a full scholarship and a future that seemed limitless. The treatments were aggressive, expensive, and ultimately unsuccessful. He died 8 months after his diagnosis, leaving Maya with a mountain of medical debt that her family's insurance barely touched, and a grief so profound it made finishing her dissertation feel impossible. The restaurant job was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while she figured out what came next. That was 4 years ago. Somewhere along the way, temporary became permanent. She discovered she was good at this work, good at reading people, good at making them feel seen. The tips were decent, especially at a place like the Crown Plaza, where wealthy patrons often left generous gratuities. More importantly, it kept her busy, kept her mind occupied, kept the grief at bay. But working with Khalid and his father had awakened something in her, that old instinct she developed during her graduate studies, the ability to see beyond what people showed on the surface. She'd read about selective mutism during her training, understood it as a trauma response, a protective mechanism the mind employed when the world became too painful to engage with through words. She'd noticed Khalid and Tariq during their 3rd visit back in January. The father's expensive suit and the quiet desperation in his eyes, the child's hollow silence, and the way he moved through the world like a ghost. She'd overheard fragments of phone conversations, Tariq speaking to doctors, therapists, specialists. She'd watched him try to coax responses from his son, watched the boy retreat further into himself with each failed attempt. Maya had made a decision then. She wouldn't try to fix Khalid. She wouldn't be another well-meaning adult pushing him to be something he wasn't ready to be. She would simply treat him like a person, a whole, complete person who deserved respect, regardless of whether he spoke or not. She would let him exist without expectations. The weeks that followed had been subtle. She learned to read Khalid's body language, the small nods and gestures that communicated his preferences. She learned that he liked when she described the specials in detail, even though he always ordered the same thing. She learned that he watched the kitchen with intense focus, particularly when the chefs were preparing rice dishes. That observation had led to a conversation with Tariq 3 weeks ago. They'd been waiting for dessert when he'd asked if she had children of her own. She'd told him about Carlos, about the brother she'd lost, about how grief changed everything. Tariq had opened up in return, sharing memories of his late wife, Layla. She was Palestinian, he'd said softly, his eyes distant. Her family immigrated when she was young, but she kept all the old traditions, especially in the kitchen. She made this rice dish, mujadara, with lentils and caramelized onions. Khalid loved watching her prepare it. She'd let him help, let him stir the pot, let him taste the spices. He hasn't eaten it since she died. Maya had listened, her heart aching with recognition. She knew that particular grief, the way food could carry memories, the way certain smells or tastes could transport you back to moments you'd lost forever. She'd asked Tariq to describe the dish in detail, written everything down on a napkin, tucked it carefully into her apron pocket. The next day, on her break, she'd researched Palestinian cooking techniques, watched videos, read recipes. She'd grown up in a Puerto Rican household where food was love made tangible, where her grandmother's kitchen had been the heart of their home. She understood the language of cooking, the way certain dishes could speak to parts of us that words couldn't reach. She'd approached Pierre, the Crown Plaza's head chef, with her request. He'd been skeptical at first. This was a French restaurant, after all, not a Middle Eastern one. But Maya had been persistent, and Pierre had a soft spot for her. He'd agreed to learn the technique, to prepare a small portion of mujadara as a side dish if Tariq requested it. Now, as Maya walked toward the kitchen to place their order, she felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Tariq had mentioned the rice again tonight, and she'd seen something in Khalid's expression when he did, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or longing. She wasn't trying to heal the boy. She wasn't trying to make him speak. She was simply trying to offer a small piece of comfort, a reminder that his mother's love still existed in the world, even if she didn't. Maya pushed through the kitchen doors, the familiar heat and chaos washing over her. She found Pierre at his station, precisely plating a sea base with microgreens. "Pierre," she said, handing him the order slip. "Table 12, can you do that rice dish we talked about, as a side for the boy?" The chef glanced up, his weathered face softening. "The Palestinian one? With the lentils?" "Yes, exactly the way we practiced." Pierre nodded, already reaching for ingredients. "For the quiet boy, yes? I make it perfect." Back in the dining room, Tariq watched his son with the careful attention that had become second nature. Khalid sat with his usual stillness, but there was something different tonight, a subtle shift in his posture, a slight tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there when they'd arrived. His eyes kept drifting toward the open kitchen, visible through the elegant archway at the far end of the restaurant. The Crown Plaza prided itself on its open-concept design. Diners could watch the chefs at work, see the artistry that went into each dish, witness the choreographed dance of culinary excellence. Most patrons found it entertaining. For Khalid, it seemed to be something more. Tariq followed his son's gaze and saw Pierre at his station, working with unusual focus. The head chef was preparing something that wasn't on the menu, something that required him to step away from his usual French haute cuisine. Tariq recognized the movements, the way Pierre was caramelizing onions in a wide pan, the careful measuring of lentils, the particular spices he was selecting from small glass jars. His throat tightened. Maya was actually doing it. She was preparing Layla's dish. He thought back to that conversation 3 weeks ago when he'd shared memories of his wife with a waitress he barely knew. It had been uncharacteristic of him. Tariq was a private man, someone who kept his pain carefully guarded behind a facade of control and competence. But something about Maya's genuine kindness, her own story of loss, had made him feel safe enough to be vulnerable. Layla had learned to make mujadara from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before her. It was a simple peasant dish, really. Rice and lentils cooked with caramelized onions, seasoned with cumin and allspice. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but Layla had made it with such love, such care, transforming humble ingredients into something that tasted like home, like heritage, like belonging. Thursday nights had been mujadara nights in their household. Layla would let Khalid stand on a small stool beside her at the stove, his small hands carefully stirring the onions as they slowly turned golden brown. She'd teach him Arabic words, basil for onions, adas for lentils, ruz for rice. She'd tell him stories about Palestine, about the grandmother he'd never met, about a homeland that existed now only in memory and food. After she died, Tariq had tried once to make the dish himself. It had been a disaster. Burnt onions, mushy rice, the wrong proportions of everything. Khalid had taken one look at the plate and left the table, retreating to his room, where Tariq heard him crying for the first time since the funeral. Tariq had never attempted it again. Now, watching Pierre work with Maya hovering nearby, offering quiet guidance, Tariq felt a complex mix of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also fear. What if this didn't work? What if it made things worse? What if Khalid felt this was a betrayal of his mother's memory, an inadequate imitation of something sacred? Khalid was still watching the kitchen, his small body leaning slightly forward now. Tariq noticed his son's hands had moved from his lap to the table's edge, fingers curled around the polished wood. It was the most animated he'd seen the boy in months. Around them, the restaurant hummed with Friday evening energy. A table of business executives laughed loudly over cocktails. A couple, celebrating their anniversary, fed each other bites of chocolate soufflé. A family with 2 teenage daughters debated whether to order another appetizer. Life, normal and loud and messy, swirled around them while Tariq and Khalid existed in their bubble of quiet grief. Maya appeared beside their table, a basket of warm bread in her hands. "Your meals will be ready shortly," she said, setting the basket down with a gentle smile. "The chef is taking extra care tonight." She glanced at Khalid, then back at Tariq. There was a question in her eyes, a silent asking of permission, of confirmation that this was okay, that she hadn't overstepped. Tariq gave her a small nod, gratitude thick in his chest. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "For everything." Maya's smile deepened. She understood what he wasn't saying, that this small act of kindness, this effort to honor a woman she'd never met, meant more than she could possibly know. She touched Khalid's shoulder lightly, a brief, gentle gesture. "Your mom must have been an amazing cook," she said softly. Khalid's eyes flickered to her face, holding her gaze for just a moment longer than usual. Then he returned his attention to the kitchen, where Pierre was now carefully layering rice over the lentils, creating the distinctive striped appearance that Layla had always achieved so effortlessly. Tariq's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant with some urgent matter that required his immediate attention. He ignored it. For once, the business empire could wait. Right now, in this moment, nothing mattered except his son and the fragile hope that bloomed in his chest like the first flower after a long winter. In the kitchen, Pierre lifted the pot, checking the rice's texture. Maya stood beside him, watching with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this was about more than food. This was about memory, about love, about finding ways to carry the dead forward with us into the living world. The chef nodded, satisfied. The dish was ready. Maya picked up her serving tray, her heart beating faster than it should for such a simple task. She didn't know if this would make any difference. She didn't know if Khalid would even touch the food. But she knew that sometimes the smallest gestures, a remembered recipe, a familiar taste, could reach places that all the therapy and medicine in the world couldn't touch. She arranged the plates carefully on her tray and headed back into the dining room. Maya moved through the dining room with practiced grace, the tray balanced perfectly on her left hand. She'd carried thousands of plates over her years in the restaurant industry, but none had ever felt as heavy as these. The weight wasn't physical, it was the weight of hope, of memory, of a small boy's grief crystallized into 3 years of silence. As she approached table 12, she noticed the change in the atmosphere immediately. Tariq sat rigidly upright, his hands clasped tightly on the table. His knuckles were white. Khalid had shifted in his seat, his whole body angled toward the approaching tray, his dark eyes wider than she'd ever seen them. "Here we are," Maya said softly, keeping her voice deliberately casual. She set Tariq's lamb down first, the presentation impeccable as always. Perfectly seared meat fanned across the plate, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a delicate jus. Then she turned to Khalid. The boy's usual plate of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables was there, arranged exactly as he preferred it. But beside it, in a small ceramic bowl that Pierre had specially selected, sat something different. The mujadara looked simple, almost humble compared to the restaurant's usual elaborate presentations. Rice and lentils layered together, topped with deep golden brown caramelized onions that glistened under the ambient lighting. The aroma that rose from it was earthy, warm, redolent with cumin and allspice. Maya set the bowl down carefully, positioning it where Khalid could easily reach it. "Chef Pierre prepared something special tonight," she explained, her voice gentle. "Your father mentioned your mother used to make this. We thought you might like to try it." For a long moment, nobody moved. The restaurant sounds seemed to fade into the background, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, the soft jazz piano. At table 12, time seemed to suspend itself, holding its breath. Khalid stared at the bowl. His small hands remained in his lap, but Maya saw them trembling slightly. His chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. His eyes were fixed on the caramelized onions, on the way they were arranged on top of the rice, on the specific pattern that Maya had described to Pierre based on Tariq's memories. Tariq looked like he might shatter. His eyes had filled with tears that he was desperately trying to hold back, his jaw clenched with the effort of maintaining composure. Maya saw him reach for his water glass, his hand shaking so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim. "It smells just like—" Tariq's voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. Khalid leaned forward, his nose nearly touching the bowl's rim. He inhaled deeply, his eyes closing for a brief moment. When they opened again, tears were streaming down his cheeks, the first tears Maya had seen from him in all the months she'd been serving this table. The boy's lips moved, forming words without sound. Then, so quietly that Maya almost missed it, Khalid whispered, "The onions." The words were barely audible, more breath than voice, but they stopped Maya's heart. She glanced at Tariq, whose face had gone completely white. He stared at his son, frozen, as if afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile moment. Khalid reached out one small hand, his fingers hovering over the bowl. "Mama used to do that," he said, his voice still barely a whisper but growing slightly stronger. "She made the onions separate. She said it was important." His finger pointed to the way the caramelized onions were arranged, not mixed into the rice but laid carefully on top, each strand distinct and glistening. It was exactly how Layla had done it, exactly how Maya had instructed Pierre to prepare it based on Tariq's detailed description. "The onions have to be patient," Khalid continued, his voice taking on a sing-song quality, as if he were reciting something he'd memorized long ago. "That's what Mama said. You can't rush them. You have to let them turn sweet and brown and perfect." Tariq made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and pressed his hand over his mouth. Around them, The restaurant continued its Friday evening rhythm, but several nearby tables had fallen quiet, sensing something significant happening at table 12. Maya found herself blinking back tears. In her 4 years at the Crown Plaza, she'd witnessed marriage proposals, business deals, celebration dinners, and anniversary toasts. But she'd never witnessed anything like this. A small boy finding his voice again, pulled back from silence by the simple, profound language of food and memory. Khalid looked up at Maya then, really looked at her, meeting her eyes with a directness he'd never shown before. His face was wet with tears, but something in his expression had shifted. The hollow emptiness that had characterized him for so long had cracked open, allowing something else to emerge. Grief, yes, but also recognition, connection, the tentative beginning of healing. "Did you make this?" he asked her, his voice still soft but clear enough that there was no mistaking the words. Maya shook her head gently. "Chef Pierre made it, but I told him how your mama used to prepare it. Your father helped me remember all the details." Khalid turned to look at his father, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time in 3 years. Tariq couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. His son, his silent, unreachable son, had spoken. Not just one word, but sentences, complete thoughts. Memories of Layla that Tariq had feared were lost forever. "Khalid," he whispered, his voice breaking on the name. He reached across the table, his hand trembling so violently he could barely control it. "Khalid, Habibi." The Arabic term of endearment, "my beloved," hung in the air between them. Khalid looked at his father's outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, placed his smaller hand in it. The contact was electric. Tariq felt 3 years of distance collapse in that single touch. "Baba," Khalid said softly, using the Arabic word for father. "I remember." "What do you remember, son?" Tariq could barely get the words out past the emotion choking his throat. "Thursday nights. Mama would let me stir the onions. She'd say, 'Patience, ya Amar,' that's what she called me, my moon. She'd say the onions needed to caramelize slowly, that rushing them would make them bitter. Just like life, she said, some things can't be hurried." Tariq's tears fell freely now, decades of business-hardened composure crumbling completely. His wife's words, her exact phrases, her wisdom, all preserved perfectly in their son's memory, waiting 3 years to finally emerge. Maya stood beside the table, her own eyes wet, her hand pressed to her chest. She'd hoped the dish might bring some comfort, might offer Khalid a connection to his mother. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Several nearby diners were openly watching now, but Maya didn't care about discretion or professional distance. This moment was too precious, too sacred to interrupt with concerns about restaurant protocol. Khalid picked up his fork with his free hand, his other still clasped in his father's, and carefully took a small bite of the mujadara. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, his eyes closing. When he opened them again, fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "It tastes like home," he said simply. "It tastes like Mama." "Is it exactly right?" Tariq asked, his voice raw. "Is it how she made it?" Khalid tilted his head, considering. "The onions are perfect. The spices are right. It's very close. Mama used to add a tiny bit of cinnamon at the end. Not much, just enough to make you wonder what the secret was. She said every cook needed one secret ingredient." Tariq laughed through his tears, remembering. Layla had indeed added cinnamon, the smallest pinch right before serving. She'd claimed it was an old family secret, passed down from her grandmother. He'd forgotten that detail when describing the dish to Maya. "Your mama was very wise," Maya said softly, finding her voice. "About cooking and about life." Khalid looked up at her, really studying her face. "You remind me of her a little. Not how you look, but how you are. She was always kind to people. She always saw them, really saw them. That's what Baba said once, that Mama had a gift for seeing people's hearts. Maya's breath caught. She'd lost her professional composure entirely now, tears streaming down her face. That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me. Around them, the restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. The table of business executives had stopped talking. The anniversary couple was watching with gentle smiles. Even the staff members who could see table 12 had paused in their duties, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The maitre d', Antonio Moretti, approached with his characteristic discretion. He was an elegant man in his 60s who'd been with the Crown Plaza for 25 years. He'd seen countless memorable moments in this restaurant, but his eyes were suspiciously bright as he stopped at table 12. "Mr. Al-Rashid," he said quietly, "is everything satisfactory?" Tariq looked up, unable to speak. He simply nodded, squeezing his son's hand tighter. Antonio turned to Khalid, his voice gentle. "Young man, it is wonderful to hear your voice. You have been missed." Khalid blinked, seeming to realize for the first time that his silence had been noticed, that people had been waiting, hoping for this moment. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to be rude. I just couldn't. The words wouldn't." "You have nothing to apologize for," Antonio said firmly. "Nothing at all. Grief has its own timeline. You spoke when you were ready." Pierre had emerged from the kitchen, still wearing his chef's whites, a tall man with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in professional kitchens. He approached the table with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "The rice," he said in his French-accented English, addressing Khalid directly. "It is good. It honors your mother's memory." Khalid nodded solemnly. "It's very good. Thank you for making it. Mama would have liked it. She always respected good cooking." Pierre's tough exterior cracked. He cleared his throat roughly. "It was my honor, young man. Your mother, she must have been magnifique, magnificent to create such a recipe, such a tradition." The next hour unfolded like a dream. Khalid continued eating, taking small bites of the mujadara between sentences that poured out of him like water from a dam that had finally broken. 3 years of silence gave way to a flood of thoughts, memories, and observations that he'd been storing inside all this time. He told them about his school, about the art teacher, Miss Roberts, who always let him paint during lunch when the cafeteria got too loud. He talked about his therapist, Dr. Chen, and how she had kind eyes, but asked too many questions. He mentioned his grandfather in Dubai, Tariq's father, who sent him letters written in careful Arabic that Khalid had read but never responded to. "I wanted to write back," Khalid explained, pushing lentils around his plate. "But if I wrote to Jiddo, I'd have to tell him about Mama, and if I told him about Mama, I'd have to say she's gone. And saying it out loud or writing it down, it felt like making it more real, like if I never said the words, maybe it wasn't completely true." Tariq's heart broke and mended simultaneously with each revelation. His son hadn't been absent or unreachable. He'd been present the entire time, observing everything, feeling everything, simply unable to express it. The guilt Tariq felt was overwhelming. How many times had he looked at Khalid and wondered if anyone was really home behind those quiet eyes? How many times had he despaired that his son might be lost forever? "I'm so sorry," Tariq said, his voice thick. "I should have understood. I should have—" "You tried everything, Baba," Khalid interrupted gently. His maturity was startling in someone so young. "Dr. Chen said the same thing happens to soldiers sometimes. After they see bad things, their words just stop. It's not about trying harder or wanting it more. It's about the brain protecting itself. She said I'd talk again when I was ready. I guess I was ready tonight." Maya had stepped back to give them privacy, but she remained nearby, unable to completely walk away from this moment she'd helped create. Antonio had quietly instructed the other servers to attend to her tables while she stayed with table 12. The entire staff seemed to understand that this was more important than standard service protocol. As Khalid talked, Maya noticed something remarkable. With each sentence, his voice grew stronger, clearer. The rusty hesitation of those first whispered words gradually smoothed out, like an instrument being tuned after years of silence. His vocabulary was sophisticated, his thoughts articulate. He'd been learning, growing, developing intellectually, even while his voice remained locked away. The anniversary couple from a nearby table approached quietly, the husband clearing his throat with polite awkwardness. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, addressing Tariq. "We couldn't help but overhear. We just wanted to say, what a beautiful moment. Congratulations to your family." The wife was crying openly. "I'm a speech therapist," she explained. 23 years. I've never seen anything quite like this." "Young man," she addressed Khalid directly, "you are incredibly brave." Khalid considered this seriously. "I don't think I was brave," he said finally. "I think I was just very sad for a very long time." The rice helped. It reminded me that Mama isn't really gone, not all the way. Her recipes are still here. Her words are still in my head. Her love is still—" He touched his chest. "Still here. Maybe that's what I needed to remember before I could talk again." The woman pressed a hand to her mouth, nodding. Her husband guided her gently back to their table. But the moment had opened something. Other diners began approaching, offering quiet congratulations, sharing their own stories of loss and recovery, of children who'd struggled and eventually found their way back. The business executives sent over dessert for the table, 3 slices of chocolate cake that Khalid accepted with solemn gratitude. The elderly man reading Churchill sent a note via his server. From one reader to another. "Welcome back to the world of words." Through it all, Maya watched with a mixture of joy and growing concern. This was beautiful, truly miraculous, but she knew enough about trauma recovery to worry. What happened now? Would Khalid wake up tomorrow still able to speak? Or would the silence return? Would the pressure of everyone's expectations become too much? Would this moment of breakthrough be sustainable, or just a brief window before the shutters closed again? She caught Tariq's eye and saw her own concerns reflected in his face. He was ecstatic, clearly, but also terrified. This gift they'd been given, how fragile was it, how permanent? As if reading their thoughts, Khalid set down his fork and looked between his father and Maya. "I know what you're both thinking," Khalid said quietly, his voice cutting through the ambient restaurant noise. His dark eyes moved from his father to Maya with unsettling perceptiveness. "You're wondering if I'll still be able to talk tomorrow. If this is real or just temporary." Tariq opened his mouth to protest, but Khalid shook his head. "It's okay, Baba. I'm wondering the same thing. Dr. Chen warned me that when I started speaking again, it might not be smooth. Some days might be easier than others. She said it's like learning to trust a part of yourself that hurt you before." Maya pulled out the chair beside Khalid and sat down, abandoning all pretense of professional distance. "Can I tell you something?" she asked gently. Khalid nodded. "When my brother died, I stopped being able to write my dissertation. I was almost finished with my doctorate in child psychology, just 2 chapters away from completion. But after Carlos passed, every time I tried to sit down and work, my mind would just freeze. The words were there. I could feel them, but I couldn't get them from my head to the page. It took me 8 months before I could write again. Even now, some days are harder than others." "But you did write again eventually?" Khalid asked, his voice small. "I did. Not the dissertation. I never finished that. But I started writing other things. Letters to Carlos that I'll never send. Journal entries. Sometimes just lists of words I liked the sound of. The point is, your voice came back tonight, and even if it's quieter tomorrow or harder the day after, it's still there. You proved that. The silence doesn't own you anymore." Khalid absorbed this, his small face serious. "The words were always there," he said finally. "I heard them in my head all the time. Thousands of words, millions probably. They just got stuck between my brain and my mouth, like there was a wall. Tonight the wall got smaller. Maybe it won't go away completely for a while, but it's smaller now. I can see over it." Tariq reached across and gently squeezed his son's shoulder. "We'll take it one day at a time, Habibi. No pressure, no expectations. If you need to be quiet sometimes, that's okay. If you want to talk, that's okay too. We'll follow your lead." "I want to come back here next Friday," Khalid said suddenly, looking at Maya. "If that's okay. I want to try the mujadara again. Maybe I could watch Chef Pierre make it this time. Mama used to let me watch her cook. She said cooking was like science and art mixed together." Pierre, who had lingered nearby, ostensibly checking on other tables, but clearly keeping an eye on table 12, overheard this. "It would be my honor, young man. You can stand in the kitchen with me. I'll show you everything." Maya felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I work every Friday evening," she said. "I'll make sure your table is ready." The check came, though Antonio had already informed them that the Crown Plaza was comping the entire meal. "Mr. Al-Rashid, this evening has been a gift to all of us," the maitre d' had said firmly when Tariq protested. "Let us celebrate with you." As they prepared to leave, Khalid stood and carefully folded his napkin, placing it precisely on the table, a small gesture of respect that Layla had taught him years ago. He looked at Maya for a long moment, then stepped forward and hugged her waist. The embrace surprised everyone, perhaps even Khalid himself. He held on tight, his small arms wrapped around Maya with an intensity that spoke of gratitude deeper than words could express. Maya's eyes filled with tears again as she gently returned the hug, one hand resting on the boy's dark hair. "Thank you," Khalid whispered against her uniform. "Thank you for remembering her. Thank you for making it okay to remember. Your mother would be so proud of you," Maya said softly. "So incredibly proud." When Khalid finally stepped back, his cheeks were wet, but his expression was peaceful in a way Maya had never seen before. Tariq placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his own emotions clearly overwhelming him. "We owe you more than we can ever repay," Tariq said to Maya, his voice rough with feeling. The Manhattan streets were alive with Friday night energy as Tariq and Khalid walked to their car. The city that never sleeps hummed around them, taxis honking, couples laughing, groups spilling out of bars and restaurants. But inside their private bubble, everything had changed. Tariq's hand rested protectively on Khalid's shoulder as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. His son's voice kept echoing in his mind. "Mama used to do that." 3 years of silence shattered by a simple sentence about caramelized onions. It seemed impossible, yet here they were. Marcus, their driver, stood beside the black Mercedes SUV, his face lighting up when he saw them approach. Marcus had been with the family for 5 years. He'd driven Layla to her last soccer practice pickup. He'd attended her funeral. He'd witnessed Khalid's retreat into silence. "Good evening, Mr. Al-Rashid." "Young sir," Marcus said with his usual formality, opening the rear door. "Hello, Marcus," Khalid said clearly. The keys slipped from Marcus's hand, clattering on the pavement. He stared at Khalid, his weathered face slack with shock. "Khalid! You spoke?" "I did," Khalid confirmed, climbing into the car. "We had really good rice tonight." Marcus looked at Tariq with wide, questioning eyes. Tariq nodded, unable to speak himself, tears threatening again. The driver's face crumpled with emotion as he bent to retrieve his keys. "Welcome back, young sir," Marcus said thickly. "We've missed your voice." During the 40-minute drive to Greenwich, Khalid talked sporadically. Not constantly, there were long stretches of comfortable silence, but periodically he'd point out something through the window or ask his father a question. Each word felt like a small miracle. "Baba, when we get home, can I call Jiddo? I want to tell him I can talk again. I want to say I'm sorry for not answering his letters." Tariq checked his watch. It would be early morning in Dubai, but his father would want to be woken for this. "Of course, Habibi. He'll be so happy to hear from you." "Will he cry?" Khalid asked seriously. "Probably. I've been crying all evening." Khalid considered this. It's okay to cry. Mama used to say tears were just feelings that got too big to stay inside. Another piece of Layla's wisdom, preserved perfectly. Tariq wondered how many more of these gems were stored in his son's memory, waiting to emerge. When they arrived at the estate, the house was lit up, welcoming. Mrs. Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, their housekeeper for a decade, met them at the door. She took one look at Khalid's face and somehow knew. "You talked?" she asked in her accented English. "I did, Mrs. Chen. I had mujadara tonight. It was almost as good as Mama's." The older woman clasped her hands to her chest, speaking rapidly in Mandarin, a prayer of thanks, Tariq thought. Then she switched to English. "Your Mama would be so proud, so proud." After Khalid went upstairs to prepare for bed, Tariq retreated to his study and immediately called Dr. Chen, the therapist. She answered on the second ring, professional even at 9:30 on a Friday evening. "Dr. Chen, it's Tariq al-Rashid. Khalid spoke tonight." There was a brief pause. Complete sentences, paragraphs, conversations, for over an hour. "Tell me everything." Tariq recounted the evening, the mujadara, Maya's kindness, the moment Khalid first whispered about the onions. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, her trained mind processing the information. "This is significant," she said finally. "But Mr. al-Rashid, I need you to understand something crucial. This breakthrough is real and important, but the journey isn't over. Khalid may have days where speaking feels easy and days where it feels impossible again. The trauma doesn't disappear overnight." "I understand," Tariq said, though part of him desperately wanted to believe that everything was fixed now, that his son was completely healed. The fact that food memory triggered this response makes sense. Sensory experiences, smell, taste, touch, often access emotional memories that verbal therapy can't reach. The mujadara connected Khalid to his mother in a visceral way that felt safe enough for him to express himself. "That's beautiful. But it's not a cure," Tariq finished quietly. "No, it's a door opening. A significant door, but just the beginning. Tomorrow, next week, next month, we continue supporting him. No pressure, no expectations. Let him lead." After the call, Tariq climbed the stairs to Khalid's room. His son was sitting in bed, a book open in his lap, but his eyes were distant. "Can't sleep?" Tariq asked, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "I keep thinking about Mama," Khalid said softly. "More than usual." "Is that bad?" "No, Habibi. It's not bad at all. I'm scared, Baba." "Of what?" "That tomorrow I'll wake up and the words will be gone again, that tonight was just a dream." Tariq pulled his son into his arms, holding him close. "If the words go quiet again, we'll wait for them. If they stay, we'll celebrate them. Either way, I'm here. I'm always here." Khalid nodded against his father's chest, and soon his breathing deepened into sleep. The week that followed was a roller coaster of hope and setbacks. True to Dr. Chen's warning, Khalid's voice didn't flow consistently. Some mornings he woke up chatty, sharing dreams or asking questions over breakfast. Other mornings, the silence returned, heavy and impenetrable, and no amount of gentle encouragement could coax words from him. Monday had been good. Khalid spoke to his grandfather in Dubai for 20 minutes, apologizing for his long silence, listening to Jiddo cry with joy across the phone line. He'd attended school and reportedly told his teacher, Miss Roberts, about the Mujadara. Though he'd grown quiet again by lunchtime, Tuesday was harder. Khalid woke silent and remained that way through breakfast, through the car ride to school, through dinner that evening. Tariq had to fight his rising panic, remind himself that this was part of the process, that Dr. Chen had warned him. But seeing his son retreat back into silence after experiencing the miracle of his voice was almost harder than the original 3 years had been. Wednesday brought words again, though fewer and more cautiously offered. Thursday was better still. By Friday evening, as they prepared to return to the Crown Plaza, Tariq felt cautiously optimistic, but deeply anxious. What if the restaurant didn't hold the same connection this time? What if the Mujadara failed to work its prior effect? What if Khalid's association with the place became tainted by unmet expectations? "I'm nervous," Khalid admitted in the car, his voice small. It was the most he'd said all day. "Me too," Tariq confessed. "What if I can't talk to Maya? What if the words don't come? Then we'll write her a note, or draw her a picture, or just sit quietly and she'll understand. Maya doesn't need you to perform, Habibi. She just needs you to be yourself." When they arrived at the restaurant, Antonio greeted them at the door with his customary warmth, but noticeably less formality. "Welcome back, Mr. Al-Rashid. Young Khalid, your table is ready." Maya was waiting at table 12, her face brightening when she saw them. She wore the same black and white uniform, the same genuine smile, but something in her posture suggested she'd been anxious about this reunion too. "Hello," she said simply, making eye contact with Khalid first, then Tariq. Khalid stood very still for a moment, then whispered, "Hi, Maya." The relief on her face was palpable. "I'm so glad you came back. Chef Pierre has been preparing all day. He wants to show you how he makes the onions." Khalid's eyes widened with interest and he nodded. The evening unfolded more quietly than the previous week. Khalid spoke less, his sentences shorter and more carefully chosen, but the quality of his words when they came was thoughtful and genuine. He watched Pierre in the kitchen, asked questions about temperatures and timing, listened intently as the chef explained the art of patience in caramelizing onions. When the Mujadara arrived, Khalid ate slowly, savoring each bite. He didn't cry this time. Instead, he smiled, a small, private smile that suggested he was visiting pleasant memories rather than mourning their loss. "It's perfect," he told Pierre when the chef checked on their table. "Thank you for teaching me." During dessert, chocolate soufflé that Maya recommended, Khalid turned to his father with sudden seriousness. "Baba, I want to learn to cook Mama's recipes. Not just Mujadara, all of them. Her stuffed grape leaves, her lamb with pine nuts, her cardamom coffee, all the things she made that tasted like love." Tariq felt his throat tighten. "That's a beautiful idea, Habibi. I don't want to forget how they taste, and maybe if I learn to make them, I can share them with other people. Like Maya shared the Mujadara with us. Maybe food is how we keep people alive after they're gone." Maya, who had been refilling water glasses nearby, paused. "You know, Khalid, that's one of the wisest things I've ever heard. My grandmother used to say that recipes are love letters from the past. Every time we cook them, we're reading those letters again." "Did your grandmother teach you to cook?" Khalid asked. "She did. Puerto Rican food, arroz con gandules, pernil, tembleque. When she died, I thought I'd never be able to make those dishes without crying. But eventually I realized that cooking them made me feel close to her again, like she was standing beside me in the kitchen guiding my hands." Khalid absorbed this, his dark eyes thoughtful. Maybe that's what Mama was doing last week. Maybe she guided Chef Pierre's hands so the mujadara would taste right. So I would remember it was okay to miss her and okay to keep living at the same time. The profound simplicity of a child's wisdom struck everyone within earshot. Pierre, who had returned to check on another table, stopped and made the sign of the cross. Antonio discreetly wiped his eyes. Maya had to excuse herself to the kitchen to compose herself. As they prepared to leave that evening, Tariq found himself reflecting on how much had changed in a single week. His son wasn't fixed. Healing didn't work that way, but something fundamental had shifted. Khalid had found a way to hold both grief and hope simultaneously, to honor his mother's memory while continuing to grow and learn and live. "Same time next Friday?" Maya asked as they gathered their coats. Khalid looked up at his father, then back at Maya. "Yes, please. And maybe you could teach me some of your grandmother's recipes sometime, if you want to." Maya's smile was radiant. "I would love that, Khalid. I would absolutely love that." As they walked to the car, Khalid slipped his hand into his father's, a gesture of trust and connection that Tariq hadn't felt in 3 years. They walked in comfortable silence, and Tariq realized that silence itself was no longer the enemy. Sometimes silence was peaceful. Sometimes it was reflective. Sometimes it was just a pause between words, not an absence of them. The important thing was that now, when Khalid needed to speak, he could. And when he needed to be quiet, that was okay too. 6 months later, the Crown Plaza hosted an unusual event. The private dining room had been transformed into a teaching kitchen for the evening, tables pushed aside to make room for cooking stations. Guests gathered around as Khalid al-Rashid, now 8 years old and remarkably poised, stood at the center station wearing a child-sized chef's apron. "Welcome, everyone," he said clearly, his voice strong and confident. "Tonight, I'm going to show you how to make my mother's mujadara. Chef Pierre taught me the technique, but the love comes from her." The audience, a mix of restaurant staff, regular patrons, and families from Khalid's school, applauded warmly. Tariq stood in the back, his phone recording every moment, tears of pride streaming unashamedly down his face. Beside him, Maya watched with equal emotion. In the months since that first breakthrough, she'd become more than just their waitress. She'd become family. She spent Sunday afternoons at the Greenwich estate, teaching Khalid recipes from her Puerto Rican heritage, while he taught her the Palestinian dishes he'd learned. They cooked together, shared stories of the people they'd lost, and found comfort in the universal language of food and memory. The experience had awakened something in Maya too. She'd started taking online courses, working toward finally completing that doctorate she'd abandoned. But her focus had shifted. She was now studying food therapy and its role in childhood trauma recovery. Khalid had become her inspiration, proof that healing could come from unexpected places. "The secret," Khalid explained to his audience, stirring onions in a wide pan, "is patience. Mama used to say you can't rush the sweetness. The onions need time to transform, just like people need time to heal." Pierre stood nearby, ready to assist but letting Khalid lead. The boy had become a fixture in the Crown Plaza kitchen, spending hours after school learning techniques, asking questions, developing a genuine passion for cooking. The chef had found an unlikely protégé, and their bond had become one of the restaurant's most heartwarming stories. As Khalid layered rice over lentils, demonstrating the technique with careful precision, he continued talking. Not constantly. There were still days when words came harder than others, but when he spoke now, it was with intention and meaning. "When my mama died, I forgot how to talk," he said simply, addressing the elephant in the room with the honesty only children possess. "Not because I didn't want to, but because the sadness was bigger than my words. My Baba tried to help. Doctors tried to help. Everyone tried so hard. He glanced at Maya, smiling. But what helped most was someone who didn't try to fix me, someone who just saw me and was kind. Maya gave me something that reminded me of my mama's love, and that reminder made it safe to find my voice again. The room was silent, except for the sizzle of onions. I'm telling you this because maybe some of you know someone who's quiet, someone who's hurting, and maybe you think they need big, expensive things to get better. But sometimes they just need to know they're not forgotten. Sometimes they need a reminder that the people they lost are still with them in small ways, in recipes, in memories, in the kindness of strangers who become friends. As Khalid plated his first serving of mujadara, arranging the caramelized onions exactly as his mother had taught him, Antonio began a slow applause that quickly spread through the room. People weren't just clapping for a well-executed dish. They were celebrating resilience, healing, and the mysterious ways that human connection can bridge even the deepest grief. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the kitchen had been restored to order, Khalid sat at table 12 with his father and Maya, sharing the mujadara he'd prepared. "Mama would have loved this," Khalid said softly. "Not just the rice, but all of it. The teaching, the sharing, the way food brings people together." "She would be so proud of you," Tariq said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you." Maya raised her water glass. "To Layla, to Carlos, to everyone we've loved and lost, and to the unexpected ways they lead us back to life." They clinked glasses, Khalid's apple juice meeting the adult's water, and in that simple gesture was everything. Grief acknowledged, love remembered, hope restored. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with its usual Friday night energy. But inside the Crown Plaza, at table 12, 3 people who had each survived their own darkness sat together in companionable silence, proof that sometimes healing arrives not with fanfare, but with something as simple as perfectly caramelized onions and the courage to remember.